Hello everyone and welcome back to the Lanz Shack. Today's video is going to be on the Inupiaq language, and this language is spoken in a region known as the North Slope in Alaska, mostly around where the town of Nome is on the western end of Alaska, as well as throughout the North Slope in places such as Barrow, Alaska, which is now known as Inupiaq, and it is also spoken in northwest Canada, and that dialect is known as Umarmiutun. The number of speakers has declined significantly, almost by half, from about 2,100 speakers to only 1,250 speakers, out of a population that has increased from around 16,000 to 21,000. So this has gone down from about 1 in every 8 people, roughly, to now 1 in fewer than 10 people. The agenda that we're going to have today for the language, we are going to talk about the language distribution and dialects. We're going to talk about the sound system, or at least a little bit about it, the syntax, the nouns, and the verbs. We're not going to go very in depth with this today because there's not a lot of time, but in the next video, in part 2, I'm going to dive in deeper to the moods and the verbs. The purpose of this video is to focus more on what makes this language unique in the Eskimo-Aleut language family. So, the language distribution. Today, in northern Alaska, we're not talking about the Canadian dialect today, which is basically a sub-dialect of the North Slope dialect, and I believe this is mostly a political boundary rather than an actual one, because on most maps with Inupiaq, those Umarmiutun, which is the dialect of northwest Canada, is included in the North Slope dialect of Inupiaq. There are also 3 other dialects. The main one is called Qawiaraq. This dialect is where the stronghold of the language is, where most people speak it today, from Noatak to Buckland to Selawik to Norvik. And there's also a significant amount speaking the Malimute dialect. There is a source on this dialect as well, mostly centered around Kovuk, but there's also a significant amount of people in Shaktoolik and in Unalakit. And then the Bering Strait dialect, there's not a lot of speakers left of that. And the black arrows over there, those indicate the Canadian dialect, where that starts. Pretty much once you pass Kot Tovik, that's where the dialect begins. And on to the sound system. So we're just going to talk about the sounds that are unique to Inupiaq within the Eskimo-Aleut language family, as well as those that are different from English. So the Inupiaq language contains a sound that looks like an L, and it has a semicircle through it. We've discussed this in the Inupiaq videos. And it also has the Y sound, as in million, which is represented by a G with a dot on it. And then there is also a sound known as a voiceless retroflex fricative, which sounds like this. Sha. And then this Z with a tail on it, that is known as a voiced retroflex fricative, and it sounds like this. Ja. And then this symbol here that looks like a capital N, but some lowercase version of that. That's called a voiced uvular nasal, and it's pronounced like this. Nga, nga. These sounds do not exist in the English language, and I believe the sh and the zh sound both are in Mandarin, standard Mandarin Chinese, and in the Polish language. I'm not sure about the voiced uvular nasal. However, it is supposedly in the Northumbrian dialect of English, and it's also in... And the syntax. So Lanz, who is the author and the researcher behind the main source, says that the Inupiaq language syntax is fluid. So it is possible to use mostly any sentence order when you're speaking this language. And because the language has what's called case marking, which is a common trait in Eskimo-Aleut languages, as well as verb aggrievement, it is pretty simple for speakers of the language to understand the sense that another speaker wants to say. And a sentence can also consist of a single complex verb, and these verbs are essentially verbs that house entire sentences in them. They have the meaning of an entire paragraph or an entire sentence. This is common in many agglutinative languages in the world. So in this example right here, ala shou means go berry picking. Niaq is a future. The oxy is the inc. I'm not exactly sure how to explain that, but it must be modifying the going of berry picking. And then niq, which means apparently, and suk, which is the third person dual. So basically, they two, them, those two. The indicative of that. Apparently, they began to go berry picking. So the types of syntax in this language are subject, verb, object. This is the most common and accepted syntax. This is also common in the Aleut languages and the Inupiaq languages as well. And there's also verb, object, subject, or verb, subject, object. These are, possible, but they're unusual. And this type of sentence word may occur when the verb is the only thing in the sentence. There is an example of that in the last slide. And then you have modifier sentences, which are basically like saying to be green or to be ready in a sentence. In these cases, the verbs can appear anywhere in the sentence. And subject, object, verb, this is the least marked word order, not in general, but only whenever verbs require an object. Basically a transitive sentence, if you're familiar with that terminology, which is basically just a sentence that has a verb that does not require an object. So that would be like I eat, I drink. You don't drink something, you don't eat something, you just drink, or you just eat, or you just walk. You don't walk your dog, basically. And this is considered the principal word order of not only this language, but most Eskimo Aleut languages. And the noun system. So types of cases, these are going to be ones that are either different from most European languages, or rather ones that you may study in like German or something like that. We'll also add a couple on here as well that are a little bit more common. So we have ergative here. So ergative here, this is common to other Eskimo Aleut languages. This is for subjects of a transitive sentence or sentence that has a object. And this can also be used to express the genitive case of the possessor. You also have the absolutive, which is, for all intents and purposes, the nominative, or the subject of the sentence, especially one where there's no object, and if there is, then it would be that object. However, this doesn't have any case ending. And then you have the instrumental. The instrumental, obviously, you have the traditional instrumental, which is, by this, or, you went on a train, by train, or you wrote with a pencil. This also marks the indefinite object of some transitive verbs. And then you also have sentences where you say, we build a boat. That boat in that type of sentence where you don't need to have an object, because you could say we're building, we're building something, or we're building, we're building right now. That object right there, that thing you're building, you don't need to have it there, but that is what they mean by this instrumental. So that's marked by that. And then it can also mark new information. So information that hasn't been spoken about before or talked about. And then you have the allative, which is basically toward somewhere. And then you have ablative, from somewhere. And then you have the perlative. This is different. I've never seen this case ever, even in Eskimo Aleut languages. This marks the topic of conversation, and it also marks basically that you're on the path of something. You're on you're on the way to somewhere. And then you have the simulative, which is marked by tune. This marks similarity. It's basically just like or as. It basically just means like or as. It just functions as a case. It's considered a case. This is also similar in the Inupiaq languages as well. There is also the locative and the vocative as well. However, those are similar to many languages, so I didn't add them here. And then the verb system. We have the main verbal moods here. We also have interrogative, and we also have conditional. Interrogative being for questions, and conditional being I would blah blah if I were rich blah blah type of thing mainly. So in this language, we have the indicative. This is used when declaring sentences or clauses. It's very common, used with the present tense mainly. So if you're doing something, generally, this is going to be something that's used. and then you have the coordinative. So this expresses, it basically expresses while, and also if you're saying something like, eating, I drink, that eating is going to be marked with this coordinative verbal mood. And there's also the imperative. The reason I decided to use that here is because it's unique to this language. So although it's primarily used for issuing orders, it also has both an affirmative and a negative form, or paradigm, as you may see in works about this language. And Lanz also says that the participial mood may also be marked as a mood because it can stand as the sole finite verb in a clause or sentence. Anyway, as I mentioned before, this was just a very quick part 1. I just wanted to talk about what this language had, what makes it unique. And in the part 2 of this series, we're going to dive deeper into the superlative mood and other moods that this has, and into the case system, and into the pronoun system, possession, and much more. Thank you everybody for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.